Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Kathy Kroll. I'm a recreational therapist at a local rehab hospital here in Portland. And all survivors of brain injury on a daily basis have to deal with challenges. And today we have members of Brain Injury Voices, award-winning Brain Injury Voices. They're going to talk about filling your toolbox, strategies to face the challenges of brain injury. And we have Ken Shapiro, Paula Sparks, Ted Brackett, and Jeff Siebel here from Brain Injury Voices, who are going to talk about different issues to dealing with strategies when you're living with a brain injury.
Take it away, Jeff. All right, I'm going to stand up, because you couldn't tell I'm here if I don't stand up. So I want to make sure you see me. I'm assuming most, if not all of you, looked in the mirror this morning at some point. Whether you brushed your teeth or washed your face, whatever. If you didn't, here's your chance. Look in the mirror right now. All right, you like what you see? Well, yeah. Do you know what you see? When you looked in the mirror, did you say, who the bleep am I? Just couldn't figure out who you were. One of the big problems with brain injury is loss of sense of self, not understanding who you are anymore. Defining our sense of self depends on a couple of things. We can look at our gender, our race, things we can't change very easily. We can look at the things we stand for, self-awareness, which is an issue with brain injury, having self-awareness and having awareness of how what you're doing affects other people. And two other things that we think about when we think of sense of self is our past and our future. What happened in our past, how do we relate to it, and how does that carry over into how we think about the future? As human beings, much of what we know about ourselves and conduct ourselves is based on things that happened in the past. In addition, past experiences play a large role in creating expectations and allowing us to plan for the future. So when you've had a brain injury, there's this huge disconnect. You can't relate anymore to that person who had all those past experiences. You can't relate to those past experiences. Maybe you can't remember them. And consequently, you can't really plan for the future, and you have no vision for what the future is going to be like. No wonder we're so confused. No wonder we lose our sense of self. So what are we going to do? Well, your sense of self is not going to pop out of the ground like a jack-in-the-box. Do you know what a jack-in-the-box is? I don't think they have any iPhones anymore. That's not going to happen. It's going to take hard work and dedication to find yourself, a sense of self. And you're going to have to make a leap of faith at one point and put a stake in the ground and say, this is where I'm going to begin. I trust myself, and moving forward, this is what I'm going to be. So let me tell you a little bit about the way I worked on my sense of self. After college, my accident was actually 40 years ago, a year and a half into college. After I finished, I decided I was going to drive out to Colorado to work at a ski area where a friend of mine was. So I had this map. Actually, not this same map, because this is a Connecticut farm map. But you get the idea. And what it does is this was great for helping me get my car out there. But myself, I'm in the car driving out there saying, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what my capabilities are. I don't know what I stand for. I have no idea what I'm going to do. In my mind, I kept saying I'm going to get a job at the radio station. But I had a pretty bad speech problem, and I don't know how I was going to do that, but I was going to do it. So anyway, I was really confused, and I came up with 4 standards for myself. That was the stake I put in the ground. Those 4 standards that I decided I was going to follow. I knew from my past experiences and knowledge that they were good things to follow. I was going to be honest, I was going to be trustworthy, I was going to be respectful, and I wasn't going to quit. I figured those 4 things could be my foundation. And moving forward, they'd be a good thing to build the rest of my life around. If I had those 4 things, and plus, if I was purposeful in what I did, meaning I did things for a reason, and I did it for the right reason, then I don't think it could go wrong.
Way to go.
Thanks.
Sounds really good.
Thanks. Well, it worked a little bit. So anyway, haven't had any comments like that before. I'm not sure where to go from there. Those are my foundation. But what I call this was resetting zero. If you want to think of what it is, like in a picture, imagine I was a used car. And I was a used car, actually I was a new car once. And then I had, because of my car accident, I had negative 10,000 miles on me. And I had to drive that car 10,000 miles just to get to zero where I could start living my life and I could start, being who I was. So those 10,000 miles would be spent accumulating all the observations, experiences, knowledge that I used to have and trying to put them into some form and being able to use them along with the 4 standards I have would hopefully condition me into a human being. And these 10,000 miles that you drive, this is what we call practice. It's practice being a human being, practice being a person, and that will enable you to regain your life, hopefully, and move forward. Thank you.
My talk has to do with those things that people with brain injuries need to find for themselves. With my brain injury, I was almost at the top of my 10-foot step ladder and it went over and I landed on the back of my head in my driveway and disturbed the brain stem, so I died. My wife, who is my caregiver, which is one of the things that everybody with a brain injury really needs to find, was able to do CPR and got me back in 6 minutes, which is good because it took the rescue over 8 minutes to get to the house. So I wouldn't be here if she hadn't done the CPR. But after that, I went into a coma before I even got to the hospital, so I couldn't tell anybody anything. And so my caregiver, my wife, was able to tell the hospital exactly what was going on with me. She was able to tell them that I had diabetes. She was able to tell them that I had 2 artificial knees. She was able to tell them what happened in the accident and so forth. So they knew immediately that I had a brain injury, which was really, really fortunate for me, because a lot of people don't get services for brain injury because the hospital doesn't know what's going on. They knew with me. I was in a coma for 9 days, and when I woke up, I didn't even know who I was, what I was, where I was for then, and then all the way through rehab, basically. So what Carol did was she revived me. She told the hospital all about me. She kept, when I was transferred, I was in the hospital a month. When I was transferred to rehab, she let rehab know a lot of things that were going on, and she kept a real close eye on rehab. And after about 3 weeks, she was really, really upset because one of the symptoms of somebody with a brain injury is that they don't eat very well. Well, I didn't eat at all for 3 weeks. And she called the doctor from rehab at home at night and went up one side of him and down the other, as only my wonderful Italian wife would do. And the next morning I was taken upstairs and they put a tube in my stomach to give me nutrition. Because I had already lost 20 pounds and so forth, so it was real important. So then I really found out a lot of things here and there and so forth that I didn't like, and Carol really didn't like it at all because they told her that, probably with my injury, I probably wouldn't be able to talk very clearly. I probably would not be able to walk very well. Very likelihood that I would never, ever be able to drive, and so forth. So she started thinking about learning about brain injury, and so did I after a while, and this is learning about brain injury. And what really helped me was after I left rehab, which was for 2 months. I was in rehab for 2 months. And started therapy and so forth, but I was able to go to my neurologist then. Then I started really learning about brain injury. He told me to begin with that what the therapist had told me at rehab probably was absolutely true. He also said that because of the brain injury and how serious my brain was injured, it was injured in 5 different lobes. And he told me that I would never be able to ski again. I would never be able to ride a bike again. I would not ever, ever climb. Do not even get on a step stool. And then he said something that really, really disturbed me immensely. You will never be able to teach again. Because he says instead of calming, I taught special ed, instead of calming a student down when they got upset or whatever, they were afraid that I would hit them because of problems that were with my emotions and so forth. So I became really, really depressed. I'm talking about, I went into suicidal depression for 2 years. And I'll talk about that in a little bit when I get a little bit further. So learning about brain injury was very, very important to me. Then about a year and a half after that, I learned that there was a group at rehab, and it's called the support group. Here's the support group. And this was really, really helpful to me. The very first meeting I went to support group, I found out that I wasn't alone, which is just unbelievable, because I thought that I was the only person in the world that ever had a brain injury. And there were so many people there that had a stroke, that had TBI, that had aneurysms and so forth. And I realized that not only did I have a particular brain injury, but there were all kinds of people out there that had them. So I really, really learned a great deal about brain injury. And one of the major things, again, that I learned was that there were my depression was so common that it was unbelievable. But the thing that I also found out was that it wasn't my brain injury that necessarily caused the depression. The brain injury exacerbated my depression. It also exacerbated the PTSD that I already had. And we always thought that all of that stuff was because I wasn't able to teach. Well, that was part of it. The other part of it was what happened before my accident, and that was the abuse of my father. And so for about 3 years, we went through the depression, we went through suicidal ideations, we went through the abuse of my father, and so forth. I still go to the psychologist. It's been 10 years. And he is just an absolutely incredible person. And what we talk about now is a lot of things, like, for instance, my anxiety, my emotions, which the filters were damaged when I got injured and so forth. So in order to come up with techniques in order to support those, plus the medications that I take, then I also found out that there's a medication that I take for my PTSD that has that under control, which is just unbelievable for me. In support group, I found out by a wonderful young lady that approached me that she would like to be my mentor. And this was just unbelievable because even though I was in psychology, in seeing a psychologist, there were more and more times that I wouldn't call him, that I would call my peer mentor, and we would talk on the telephone for sometimes half an hour, 45 minutes to get my head back in shape so that I knew exactly where I was going, what I was doing, making decisions. And it was just absolutely unbelievable that I was able to find her. Everybody needs to be able to have these kinds of services. So with this, I have found most of the services that you get with a brain injury are given to you from the hospital or from rehab and so forth. But these that I've talked about are things that you have to find yourself or have other people look and say, gee, you know, Ted, you probably would be really helpful if you did this. So I found these services that all survivors need to be able to move forward. And we survivors work to educate, advocate, and support. As for instance, what I do right now is one of the major things that I do at rehab is that I have become a peer mentor. And I go into rehab and talk to patients that are there. They didn't have that when I was there. I had no idea what brain injury was when I left. Patients and their families do now. So I hope that what I have discussed with you has helped you understand these services, and that will help you if you are brain injured or if you are a peer mentor, help you on your journey.
Well, my name is Paula Sparks, and unlike Ted, I don't have the claim to fame that I died, but I came close. 9 years ago, I had a venous sinus thrombosis due to a clotting disorder that I didn't know about, which resulted in a stroke that left me paralyzed on my left side. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital, 2 weeks inpatient rehab, and 6 weeks of outpatient rehab. I returned to my work as running a Girl Scout program, after-school Girl Scout program, within 4 months. But within a year and a half, I realized I couldn't do that anymore. Although my body seemed to recover from my stroke, I was able to walk and I was able to talk and so forth, I continued to feel like something just wasn't right. So about 2 years after my stroke, I was thinking about looking for a support group. And luckily, a therapist friend who I knew recommended that I look for a brain injury support group. And it was in that support group that I started to understand the things that were the challenges that I had left. They were sensory sensitivities that were irritating my brain. I sometimes compare my brain to a broken bone. Imagine that you break the bone, it heals, but every time the weather gets bad, it aches. If you use it too much, it aches. Sometimes you can predict, sometimes you can't. And for me, that's the biggest challenge, is unpredictable. What I do today that doesn't bother me may bother me tomorrow. But becoming aware of those sensory issues has played a big part in me helping to understand what I can do to take care of myself and make things work a little bit better. One of the first things is sound. Now, I don't happen to use. It's not you, Paula. It's you. I don't happen to need these big headphones. Actually, these are my husband that he wears when he's sawing wood. But I do have to wear earplugs. I've got musicians' earplugs, and those are amazing because when I am in a group, a large group, out here in the hallway is miserable. It's not painful. It just puts my head into a big tither. So I wear earplugs. Another thing is I'm a very social creature. For those of you who know me, I don't have to tell you. And I love to talk. And I discovered that talking on the phone was much easier if I used this old school piece of equipment, which are really hard to find. But They work great. You don't have to hold the phone. So my brain's not trying to do two things at once. I can talk without holding the phone. Put it in my pocket and walk around as long as I don't catch it on a doorknob.
Is that why you're on the phone so long with me?
That's why. Well, I also use speakerphone. I have learned to use speakerphone as long as you don't move around. It seems to work.
And that looks like Madonna.
Another thing that I learned is it's really important if I go, for example, to a restaurant. Now, everywhere you go in public now, there's always music playing. It's so annoying, and lots of chatter, lots of noise. So I want to go to the restaurant, to a public place. I've learned, number one, I can ask that the music be turned down, and I will tell you I've done it, and people are usually very, very accommodating. It's not usually a problem. If they give you any trouble, you can always say I have a disability, and this is a reasonable accommodation. The other thing is to remember to sit facing away from the crowd, facing away from any windows that may be letting light in. And for me, because my affected side was my left side, it seems to work best if I sit with my left side towards the wall. So that makes life a lot easier from that perspective. Another thing that was a challenge for me that I didn't realize was movement. Now, another thing I like to do is I'm a shopaholic. And I would have the grandest times going shopping until my brain injury. And this is what I felt like when I went shopping with my brain injury. There's nothing like being in the Christmas tree shop after a brain injury. I just couldn't understand what was going on. So someone in the support group mentioned going to see an optometrist who specializes in neurological issues. Now, I had been, after my stroke, to see my own eye doctor. I knew that was an important thing to do, but he never picked anything up. But when I went to the specialist, he found that I had what's called a midline shift. So when I thought something was over here, it really was over here. Or if I thought it was here, it was really over here. So that was a part of the problem that I was having when I was walking around and in a crowd and so forth, trying to look at so many things. So I was able to get special glasses with prisms, which actually, after about a year and a half, I didn't need anymore. Another thing that really helps me is when I'm shopping in particular, I always use a grocery cart. It helps to ground me. It helps me to find my place in space. It's a simple thing. A lot of people use a walking stick or they use a cane. I tried using a walking stick, but because I have my left side doesn't work quite as well, I forget that I've got a purse and a walking stick and all that. So I don't use that stick, but I know that works for a lot of folks. And there's also vestibular therapy, which I checked into, but I didn't do anything with that. But that helps with balance if there are other little issues going on. I know a lot of people have used vestibular therapy. Another thing is lights. Now, usually we have the lights turned down in here. Today we don't, but I don't need to use these today. But something as simple as sunglasses can make a world of difference. These lights just do crazy things to our heads. And the sunglasses help. Mine were inexpensive. I got them at Walmart, and they're I call them the granny ones. They wrap around the side, and they block the light out on the side as well.
So Paula, you can use, and I see a few people here with hats with visors on.
Yes,
Works.
yes.
Just taking that light coming down makes your eyes seem so much more relaxed. So wear a hat, wear a visor, and it's going to settle things down, calm your eyes.
It's funny because not long after my injury, when I was able to get up and about, I also loved to take classes. And I came to USM here to take an adult class called OLLI, the program. And I couldn't understand why I just couldn't focus. I could not focus in that class. And it was a really easy thing. It was just for fun. And finally, took me a couple of years before I realized the walls are white, the ceiling's white, the lights are white, the tables, in the new building that I was in, everything was white. The floors were white, and there was a whole bank of windows. That's why I was having trouble focusing on and paying attention to what was going on, was all that light that was coming into my brain. So turning down the lights, pulling the shades, and putting on your dark glasses can be a big help. Now, I say I don't have this particular problem, but my husband would disagree, and that's a problem with the sense of smell. My husband swears that they need me to sniff out bombs or something because he said I can smell everything that doesn't exist. I guess I have to take it for granted. The smells don't necessarily offend me, I'm just more aware of them. So I try to avoid those aisles that have all the chemicals in them. They're horrible, horrible. It's important to use unscented products. And a lot of places now, thankfully, are recognizing that people have problems with scents, and they're asking that you don't wear them in public places. And another thing to think about there is, if you have a problem with your sense of smell, be careful when you're cooking. Because if you burn something, and we do tend to forget things, if you burn something, you're not going to notice it smelling until it's way too late. So set a timer, something nice and loud that will remind you that you walked off and left the tea kettle on, because I do that all the time. And make sure your alarms in your home are working, but once again, if you have sound sensitivities, that could be a problem. The other thing that I want to share is the importance of educating yourself. We've heard that in other workshops and talks today. Educating yourself about brain injury. The possible side effects of various foods that you wouldn't think, various beverages, adult beverages in particular, caffeinated beverages, medications, both over-the-counter and prescription. They can either interact with what you have, other medications you're taking, or what your brain just may not be able to handle them the way it would ordinarily handle them. And last but not least, I found this out the hard way. For some reason, it seems I need to have a surgery of some sort every other year or so. And I discovered that anesthesia and an injured brain do not pair well together. I come out of the anesthesia fine, but it lingers and lingers and comes back to haunt me in unusual ways. It actually led me to becoming seriously dehydrated and ending up back in the hospital because the water smelled so bad I wouldn't drink it. So talk to your doctor if you're going to be having surgery about all the possible side effects and reiterate to them that you have had a brain injury. And those are things you need to know about.
Speaking of sensitivity, can we get that thing from flashing all over the place? Is that a possibility?
Just shut it down.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, do we have a remote for the projector? Can we just turn it
He's
off?
gonna shut that down first and see if that. There.
Great.
So,
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks.
Good awareness.
I didn't even hear what she said, that was all I could see.
You want to do it all?
No thanks. It'll be in the handout, by the way. When you leave, make sure you take a handout.
So I guess on to me. Hi, I'm Ken Shapiro. In the fall of 2010, I had surgery to clip and remove an intact cerebral aneurysm and subsequently suffered a hemorrhage and a stroke. I also needed to have a craniotomy to relieve pressure on my brain, which means that a portion of my skull was removed and later replaced with a plastic skull flap, actually, because my actual piece of bone went bad. Never got a good answer on that.
Oh, you gave it to somebody else.
I don't think anybody
Don't
else
look
would
and
want
see her, she
it.
wasn't
But,
around.
I spent 2.5 months in acute inpatient rehab before returning home to my wife and 2 young sons who were 3 and 5 at the time. And I still contend with hemiparesis on my left side, so I've limited mobility in my left arm and hand, especially. I need to walk with a cane. Returning home is the focus of my topic today. While they're my primary caregivers and key motivators for my recovery, my family is also a source of many challenges I've had to confront during my rehabilitation. Unlike challenges everyone suffers with family dynamics. My first prop, which is not quite a tool, but is one of my most cherished possessions, is the helmet, which my kids decorated, but this is the helmet I had to wear whenever I was out of bed for the 2 months between my craniotomy and my cranioplasty.
Very masculine, Ken. I think it's awesome.
Probably the most macho thing I own. And it's also representative of the challenge. My biggest challenges center around the roles that I play at home and don't want to play at home. So the helmet represents the image of me as fragile and helpless, which unfortunately my kids and the rest of my family saw for 2 months when I was first in the rehab. Even when I went home after 2.5 months, I was still basically wheelchair bound. So it took a long time to be seen as a parent and a spouse and an adult son for my parents, and not as another child in the house. Key to much of that growth focused around something everybody worries about, money. I needed to take full advantage of my short-term and long-term disability insurance, initially because I was the sole source of income for my family. Fortunately, my employer was incredibly supportive, held my job for me, and worked closely with me and my therapist in planning a return to work. And within 9 months or so, I was able to return to my previous job. So that's gone a long way toward establishing that role as an adult. Along with that, money is not the only thing that defines somebody as an adult, certainly. So, and I wanted to be more than just a provider to my kids. I want to be active as a parent. I have no way of actually keeping up with them physically, but I did find after a couple of years, fortunately Maine Adaptive introduced me to recumbent tricycles, and I was able to find a great guy in Arundel who runs his own bike shop and set me up with a recumbent tricycle that is modified to my specific one-handed needs and allows me to go for rides with my kids and sometimes beat them. You probably have noticed that I'm wearing one glove. This is one of my other favorite strategies and adaptations to allow me to be more active and present for my kids, because really what's more wholesome than playing catch with your boys. And I realized quickly that using a regular baseball glove on my left hand was not going to work out very well, so I needed to be able to throw and catch with one hand. I did a search for batting gloves that had extra padding on them, so this has been a perfect adaptation for me to use so that I can throw and catch with my sons. Another thing that's been very important for me and that I hope will be a great gift for my children's is a blog that I've kept, and I will have cards up here if anybody wants them later. A blog that I've kept from the time of my diagnosis of my aneurysm throughout my recovery, and it's, for me, it's my story to my sons of how to hopefully successfully contend with life's little and big challenges and adversity, hopefully in a graceful way. They get to see the ugly side of me enough, but I'm hoping that this is some sort of historical record of the strength and dignity that I've shown through times that are less than, what's the word?
Ideal?
Well, ideal, yes, but what's indignant, but that's not the right word, but what's the opposite
Less
of
than dignity.
indignity? Would be
It
dignity.
can be depersonalizing.
Dignified,
demeaning.
that's it,
Yes,
thank
it's
you.
definitely demoralizing, certainly. So all of those things center around how I wanted to be an adult for my family and to show strength and support them just as they've supported me. What I've also had to learn to do is learn to take care of myself and educate them on my needs for taking care of myself. That's where my neck pillow, which I originally got because of the craniotomy when I couldn't put any pressure on the right side of my head. The neck pillow was really helpful in holding my head steady, but now is a great tool for reminding everybody that when Dad comes home from work, he's going to go upstairs and have some quiet time and probably fall asleep, which will not be so quiet. And my sound blocking tool is less about sound sensitivity in general as it is about sound sensitivity to rambunctious now 7 or 8 and 10-year-old boys who are rarely quiet. Also, it's been important for me to reclaim a certain amount of independence and demonstrate that I can do things for myself in one form or another. So most of my other tools center around that. First and foremost was getting my driver's license back. I have my handy spinner knob, which attaches to my steering wheel so that I can drive my car one-handed. I have what I call my jar bot, where at the end of the day when my travel mug gets a little sticky and it's hard to open one-handed, Jarbot will come and do it for me. So it's not quite independent, but it's easier than always having to ask somebody for help, even though asking for help is an essential part of recovery as well, and being comfortable with that. My final piece of, oh, sorry, no, you're right, not my final piece. I'm wearing the glove so it doesn't remind me. And I just cut my nails. One of the most demeaning things that can come out of a situation like mine is needing your most basic needs taken care of by somebody else, like cutting your fingernails. So one-handed, but I fortunately found this adaptive tool that allows me to do for myself what for quite a while I needed to ask my wife to do for me. I know she was thrilled to not have that job anymore. Another part of taking care of myself has been in having something that's uniquely mine. And by far in my recovery, the thing that I've found most that fits that bill is exactly what I'm doing today with this great group of people. Brain Injury Voices is my opportunity to give back to a community that I didn't know I was going to be part of, and that now I'm incredibly proud and enriched to be part of. So I'm very happy to now be a volunteer at New England Rehab and to be able to speak to groups and educate, advocate, and support for those like me and with medical professionals who helped me get to where I am now.
Well, to wrap it up, you get to hear me again. Often we think of or speak of brain injury as being an invisible disability. In other words, often, unless we have something else as Ken does with the stroke, it's something you can't see. People can't see it. And I often say that's the good news and the bad news. Because on the inside, or when people say you look great, That's the good news. You don't judge me because you can't tell by looking at me from the outside. But the bad news is you also don't allow for any challenges or any help I may need because of the challenges that I face. It's amazing the things that people will say to us. I know they don't mean to be unkind, and often they even think that they're encouraging us when they say these things. It could be family or friends or even strangers. They don't know what to say, just like when we are in a tough situation, we often don't know what to say to people. So sometimes they just say what comes out without thinking about it. And sometimes it's really hard to respond to some of those questions, but it's our job as people with the brain injury to educate people who don't have a brain injury. If I want people to understand about my injury, I have to be willing to share my story. And it doesn't hurt if I can use a little humor when I'm doing it. I don't like to make a big deal out of my challenges. I'm not one of those people who always walked around saying, here's what happened to me. But sometimes some people just need a little more help understanding. Now, I'm known to my friends for writing little poems, and I had a small group of friends who, as supportive as they were, still weren't getting some of the challenges I was facing. So I decided one day I would write a poem about it. And I wrote a poem called My Brain is Like a Snow Globe. And I posted it on Facebook, actually, and sent it to others who didn't do Facebook. And it was amazing how that helped them to understand the things that were going on inside of my head. So I say that just because maybe you can think, if you were having a challenge that way, think about another way to share what you're going through with friends. Maybe it's a picture you can show them of something. Maybe you can write them a letter. Maybe you can write a poem. So I mentioned about this saying, you look great. Another thing is, my husband says this all the time. You never listen to me. I already told you that. Well, I am always saying to him, I've already told you, don't tell me if I'm watching TV. Don't tell me if I'm talking on the phone. Don't tell me if I'm buried in the computer. If you want me to remember something, get my attention. Don't just walk by and say it. Get my attention and tell me, I'm telling you something important you need to remember. But we're working on that one still after all these years. And also, one thing at a time. I don't need to know that when you get up in the morning, you're going to brush your teeth and then you're going to go walk the dog. Just tell me the basics. I can't remember all that stuff, and I'll let it just fly away. Another thing is, people will say, if I say, I'm tired or I forgot something. Oh, it's our age. I forget things too. My response is, but it didn't happen to me before I had my injury. It's not my age. Now I have problems with short-term memory. It's like my head is a snow globe. You have to be willing to say, this didn't happen before. It's not the same. There may be a piece of that because I am getting older, but. Another one is, I get tired too. That's what I'll hear from people. Well, sorry folks, it's not the same thing. My tired is brain fatigue. It's like a person forced to take an unexpected detour, and by the time you get to where you're going, you're exhausted because you had to reroute yourself. Or when you have the computer going and there's too many apps and it just slows way down. That's how I try to explain to people. That's what I'm talking about when I say I'm tired. The classic, and I think everyone here with an injury has heard this before, has heard many of these before. What do you do for work? And then I have to say, well, I don't work. I used to teach, but I had to get through for health reasons. They don't need to know all the details, the gory little details. I just had to get through for health reasons. But I spend a lot of time volunteering, and I tell them about my volunteering. Helps me to contribute, know I'm contributing, and feel better about myself. This one is this is the bane for me. This was a real problem for me. I really hate this one. You could always be a Walmart greeter. Now, we all chuckle, but the person who said that to me actually works in the medical field. And I know she just didn't know what else to say when I said I couldn't work anymore. But from my perspective, that's very disrespectful of the people who are Walmart greeters. They're working hard. And my thought, I had to think about this because I didn't know how to respond to her. And I thought about it, and I just thought if I hear it again, I'll say, I wish I could, and leave it at that. And the last one is, I wish I could retire. Well, I wish I could retire too. I wish I could leave my brain injury and do the things I planned to do when I was going to retire from work. So those are just some of the things that I hear and how I try to respond to them so that I'm not offending people, but I'm educating them just a little bit about what's really going on inside this injured brain.
So in closing, the toolboxes we have up here, Jeff's toolbox, and finding who I am and sense of self, in that toolbox, there will never be an easy button, but there will always be a start button. You've got to start somewhere, move forward, try to do something. And as far as Ted's toolbox, and knowing you don't know what you don't know, but you start to ask, you network, because support is all around you. It's right here in this room. So start asking and getting that support you need. And for Paula's toolbox with the brain sensitivity, the key is you have to begin to know yourself. You have to begin to find out what you need, what affects you, increase your awareness, because then you can take better care of you. And for Ken's toolbox and family relationships, I think it's very important to remember that brain injury and stroke is a family affair, and it affects the whole family. And so they need support, they need understanding, and then to be able to embrace, if you need adaptive techniques, there's nothing wrong with that. When you embrace that, you become more self-sufficient, you become more independent, and you become part of the family. And then I think finally in Paula's tool, you have two toolboxes. In the people say the darndest thing, you're never going to stop people from saying the darndest things. They're going to keep saying them. It's how you respond. And I think in Carol's lecture this morning, a presentation about using humor, which also Bev Bryan said, find that script, use humor to educate so that you're not hurting them, but they're not hurting you either.
You guys are awesome.
I think they are.